circularity, material processing, material circularity. I'm not calling it waste. So she has raised issues, questions that I think are very interesting, because a lot of the circular economy literature is focused on the business viability, the kind of the material flow, the logistics, and those kinds of issues. Very little focus on the social aspects of circularity. So what does this mean for disadvantaged groups that are part of the waste value chain, let's say? Are they winning? Are they losing?
Material value chain, right? Material value chain.
Sorry, yes, exactly. Thank you for pointing that out. Right. So she was returning from Japan after 13 years in Japan, back to Brazil. On the way from the United Arab Emirates, we caught her and brought her and said, come give a talk, and then you can go.
And perhaps this will be another 13 years. In
yes. Yes, these are places where once you come, you don't leave. It's,
it would be nice to change the environment, so yes, would be very.
I was very disappointed that our communications people took out some of her biographical elements. She's, other than how it's promoted, is that she's a social justice.
Shall I just?
Yes. Let's go.
That's what's like.
Okay. Let's
Just
do
use
this.
our hands.
Yeah. And there you go.
Okay. Environmentalist, SDG enthusiast, anime C-drama lover. I have no idea what C-drama is.
It's Chinese dramas.
Oh, Chinese dramas, okay. Duolingo streaker, 1,940 days.
1941, 1,941 today.
Oh, very good. And karaoke maniac. I don't know, do we have karaoke bars in Armenia?
Yes.
Yes, a lot. It's
So
like
maybe-
remnants from 90s.
Mm-hmm.
If anybody wants to go tonight, just let me know.
Okay.
Okay, so with that, we're very glad that you're with us, and this week I'm calling it the Brazilian invasion, because we had, her husband give a couple of talks, she's going to give a couple of talks next week, and Isis, by the way, we know Isis because her mother was doing PhD along the same time that Monica was doing her PhD, more or less. So this is the children of my graduate studies that are now coming back. And so, very happy to have you here, please.
Thank you very much. Is it okay if I stand up?
Yeah, please.
Well, thank you very much, Alan, for that wonderful introduction. Thank you, Monica and Alan, for the opportunity to be here and give this talk. I'm a little bit of a fast talker, so if at some point I'm going too fast, like somebody please let me know. Let's go back here a little bit. So the topic for today, is there a button which I can just?
I have no idea.
Okay, just use my hand. Well,
Try the few buttons.
yeah. So for those who don't remember, for whatever reason, maybe it's too early in the morning for them, the topic for today is a social CE. So it's exactly as Alan described, CE as in circular economy, tends to be a little bit technical or focus on business models. But it very often tends to relegate the social aspects. So what I did was, you have a few studies that focus on the social aspects, but they are very rare. In fact, as of last year, because this point has been hit on a couple of times, so it's been emphasized for a while now. So last year, we actually had a little bit of an avalanche in studies that focus a little bit more on social aspects of circular economy, but my research uses environmental justice to do just that. So I chose to have a case study, to conduct a case study in Fortaleza, which is in the northeast of Brazil. And as we go on, I'll explain a bit more about all of these points. So let's see if I can make this thing work. There we go. Maybe at this point I should skip most of this because Alan basically said it all. But I was at Nagoya University since 2012. It took me a little bit to like get in shape to like start traction in order to finally finish. But I finally got my PhD last year, and it was exactly using this research. So it's hopefully it's quite fresh, so that I can answer any questions that you might have further along. So my bachelor is in law, which is why originally I went there for environmental laws. But I ended up switching to environmental studies, so it's a bit more, let's say, diverse. And yes, these are a little bit more intrinsic. Like I said, if anybody wants to go to karaoke tonight, let me know. Oops, okay. A little bit too fast now. So this is a bit the outline of what we're going to be going through. The methodology, as I said, is a case study. And the reason why I chose case studies is because it focuses on how questions. So, as Alan mentioned, our problem, we don't have enough social studies on circular economy. And as I said last year, a bit more have popped up, but they use different theories or backgrounds. Let's take a look at it. When I conducted this research, these were the main points that circular economy studies look at in terms of like social issues or in general. In terms of social, they tend to focus a lot on this particular point, job creation, especially in high-income countries. If you look at the few studies that are conducted in low or middle-income countries, you might have a bit more variation. But in high-income countries, when you do have a social aspect that is looked at in the study, it tends to focus on this. All right, so in case anybody has questions, feel free to ask at any time. I don't really like the...
Just highlight the other ones, because I think that's good to include that in our discussions.
So, as I mentioned, like circular economy is a theory or an idea that was born in high-income countries, which means it doesn't reflect as well when you take it to low and middle-income countries. Therefore, you have this division of what to focus on when you take the circular economy studies into a different environment. And hence, you have this division, like in most high-income countries, the focus will be techno-managerial. But when you take it to the global south, you have a bit more, let's say you have higher numbers of studies that will take some consideration for the social issues, the social impacts that circular economy policies or programs or studies in general might have. Another thing that is often, let's say, you can consider, there is a very common, or at least there was a very common practice of shipping waste to low and middle income countries. And this is all part of like how materials flow and how our trade, our economy works as well. In a lot of countries, starting with like China banned this import of waste. Forgot what year it was, like 2020 or so. And after China did so, Vietnam, Thailand, so all the other countries did as well. So you have an increasing number of low and middle income countries who are saying, I don't want your waste anymore. So now more and more high income countries have to deal with their own waste within their own territories. Mm-hmm. Exporting it and letting other countries deal with it is becoming less and less of a possible option. One thing that we focus a bit more frequently is stakeholder and community participation. Participation is an element that we see often in, like, our friend here from social justice might be able to confirm that. It's an element that has been more and more studied in social studies. For circular economy, it's not something that comes up very often. Often because the policies are top-down. So you have very few instances in which you have the community or other stakeholders participate. Usually it is business and government only. Then we have private agenda. Private agenda in this case means the interest of the companies or the businesses that are involved in the policy making of circular economy policies. So they obviously have their own interest in being involved, and they're going to put those interests first for the most part. And then we have two more. Overly simplistic goals and a focus on materials. This is going to come up a little bit later, but in the aspect of circular economy or waste management that most often comes up is distribution, or what to do with the materials. That is obviously a key point, it's a center point, but you have other things you need to consider as well. So these policies tend to be very simple in the sense that that's the only part that they will often focus on. And we need to branch out a bit more, including, like I said, looking at the social impacts that these policies will have, which is very often not considered. And then lastly, co-management. So co-management is, for example, if you have associations or groups in which you have not just one business or like one, let's say, yokai. Sorry, I can't remember the word in English. Like a certain area of business, for example, energies or manufacturing. So sectors. Thank you very much. So you have sectors that might co-manage a certain area, and that sometimes is looked on as a business model, for example. Okay. Oh, finally, this is very important. The role of waste pickers. So in low and middle income countries, you will have a higher population of waste pickers, and their contribution to circularity of materials or in general environmental impacts in these countries, it's going to be higher or less depending on how well organized or not they are, and obviously on their numbers. In the case of Latin American countries, waste pickers tend to be more organized than in other low and middle income countries. Specifically, Brazil is the country that has the most, it's considered to be where the waste pickers are most organized. So you have a little bit more data than in other places, but that doesn't mean we have as much data as we would like, or maybe not even reliable data, but it's at least more data than in other countries. So their role, like specifically in Brazil, we have studies that say they contribute up to anything between 30 to 90% of how much the materials go back into the production. So we don't lose these materials; they go back into the production lines or circles. So that's because I focus a lot on waste pickers during this case study, this is a very important point to keep in mind. No, sorry, that way. So, methodology. As I said, I picked case study, and I used a framework of, has anybody here ever heard of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation? I'm sure you have. Okay. So the Ellen MacArthur Foundation is biggest, as far as I can tell, the biggest institution when you think of circular economy. So it's a mixture of government and private, it's an NGO, that come together to think of circular economy policies. They have a lot of publications, and one of their main contributions to circular economy, I would say, is the creation of their 3 principles. So, which I will explain a bit further, but I use these 3 principles of circular economy from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation and the 3 elements of environmental justice according to Schlosberg to create my framework. So the research question, as you can see, it's a how question. How can the concept of environmental justice support low and middle income countries toward a better transition to a circular economy? I know somebody is going to ask, what does better mean? For a research question, better is not a very precise word. So in this case, better simply means more social, more encompassing, more inclusive. And these are my supporting questions. As you can see, they are somewhat similar so that I can find the differentials between from the framework, what the CE principles are going to give me, and so the Ellen MacArthur principles, and what the EJ elements are going to give me, looking at the same case, but through these 2 different lenses that I put together to form the one framework. I have to remember to point this there. Okay. So, case study. Why a case study? It is best for how questions, or at least you have some scholars pointing this out, and because my question was a how question, that is how we put it together. So understanding social phenomena, which is exactly what I wanted to see here, how the circular economy policies that we have in Fortaleza impact the lower, the groups that have lower, let's say in how the policies are made, but are somewhat still affected by it, less or more. So that is why a case study. Okay, get the water out of the way, maybe. There you go. So, I started with obviously literature review, and then we went through legislation as my bachelor's law, so obviously that is the part that I would focus on most. So I looked at all the legislation from federal, state, and municipal, and then as you keep going, for example, you conduct your interviews, and then you keep coming back to that, right? It's a continuous cycle. There you go. So.
She wanted to give me the water.
Thank you. Preparatory stage. So you elaborate the research question, you take on, you look at the literature review, look at the data, see how well that is, how well that goes, perfect the research questions, choose your interviewees, choose your questions, elaborate, and go on. And this is the preparatory stage. And then we have the analysis stage, and that is why I was saying it's a cycle. Because once you get here, you go back to looking at the documents, and you keep going. It's an ongoing thing until eventually you say, let's go. So for all of this, I use that framework to set up the questions, to choose the interviewees, and to identify which documents and which literature review would best make my case. All right, here we go, finally. So the case study was conducted in Fortaleza, which is the capital of the state of Ceará. Ceará is located in the northeast of Brazil. For those of you who don't know, this area is the semi-arid area of Brazil. So most of Ceará is located in that environment, which is pretty dry. And to be fair, I heard that in Armenia, Yerevan, it's about 38 degrees or so in summer. That's regular if you go to that region. It tends to go from like the 30s with climate change, global warming. It tends to be beyond the 30s. Sometimes above 40, but I think we're not quite there as a regular temperature yet. But bottom line, it's dry and hot. Doesn't rain very much, but it still does. But Fortaleza is in the coast, so it has a slightly different environment compared to that, but it's still within that state, the dry state. So, just so you have an idea of where that's located compared to where we are in the world.
It seems like the same size as Armenia. Ceará.
I have not looked that up. That is curious. I will remember to do so. Oh, okay. Well, we can't use this as a reference anyway because, as we know, this is a bit distorted. Okay, so the population, this was, a reminder, this was the study from 2022. We have had an updated census since then, and I did not update this, I'm sorry. So the population of Fortaleza is about 2.5 million people. And again, this is the state, and Fortaleza is this little point over here. And this is the kind of environment that we have there. So the area is about 250 square kilometers. The sanitation, we've reached about 74%. It's actually a bit higher now. So as a low and middle income municipality, this is actually quite high a rating. And as I mentioned before, Caatinga is the name of the vegetation from this semi-arid area. It's a little bit of a bonus here information. It's the only exclusively Brazilian environment. We have different kind of vegetations in environment. This is the only one that is 100% Brazilian. So it's very important to preserve this environment as well. Just a little bit of both, not really related to the research.
250 square kilometers, that's about the size of Yerevan.
Oh, okay. So,
About twice the population.
so we have the same area, okay. But I still know, maybe we can make a.
But more
comparative
dense.
study.
But more dense.
Yeah, twice the population.
Twice dense. And by the way, sanitation includes wastewater,
Which
or
one?
sanitation
Sanitation?
includes waste pickup and wastewater, or what is it, like sewage?
In this case, I'll have to double check, but I think it includes that, yeah, esgotamento sanitário adequado. So here's the problem. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. I don't remember if this one does. I believe it does because normally when it doesn't, it will have a separate
Yes.
entry for that. So I think in this case, it includes both.
Mm.
Wastewater and waste collection.
Collection.
Yeah. That said, sorted collection is a little bit of a question mark here. So if you look up this is IBGE, so Brazilian Institute of Geography and Statistics, so it's our official institution for studies like this. So if you look this website up for that kind of information, it says we do have sorted collection, and by we I mean Fortaleza. But that's, when it had that, it was a little bit of a question mark because this, let's say for example, if you collected from domestics, like houses and so on, that was not sorted. It was just all put together. So the kind of sorted collection that they have is not officially implemented yet. They have the legislation, they have started, but it's not officially there. Although in official sites, they say it exists. So one of the reasons why I conducted this research was to find out the difference between the legislation, the policies, and reality. What should be and what is. A bit faster. All right, so regarding the interviewees, I had a little bit of a mix. I focused a lot on the associations because as I started the interviews with government institutions, more and more I found that I could not ignore this group, and there are officially recognized, there are about 15 associations by now. Back then there were 11.
Associations on what?
Oh, sorry, waste picker associations. So I started with the Municipal Bureau for the Environment of Fortaleza, and from their answers, I started looking for different interviewees as well. And eventually, like I said, I tried to interview all of the associations. One or two I couldn't contact, but I managed to interview most of the others. A couple of them I only interviewed the, let's say, the representative, and some others I managed to interview half of the associates. So they have imbalanced proportions here, I'd say, but it still comes out as about 15 interviewees, and they all received the same questions with 1 or 2, 3 extras, and as these were semi-structured interviews, you obviously adapted a few questions as well. But for the most part, they had the same interview questions. So here we go. These are the 3 principles of circular economy as by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. The first one, which I coded as C1, design out waste and pollution. So whatever policies you make, whatever kind of product you're going to make, you always have to think of what's going to happen to it once it's done being used. So you have a TV, somebody buys, you make the TV, you sell the TV, somebody buys the TV. What happens when they're done using it? Right? So for the most part, as we have a linear economy, still now, what usually happens is you just throw that out. Right? Or at the most, you might send it to a second-hand shop. Somebody else might buy it, and maybe that's where it's going to end up in a dump somewhere. So when you produce a TV, for example, you have to think of when you are producing, when you're not even producing it, you're designing the TV and your production system. You have to think of what's going to happen to that TV once it's done being used. What's it going to go? What's going to happen to the materials that make it, that are part of that products that you're making. And obviously, as much as possible, think about where to source these materials as well, because sometimes you end up buying materials that come from, for example, a war zone. So you're actually encouraging exploitation of some populations or even the war itself. So you source the materials and then you think of what to do with these materials once the products that you make is done being used. The second principle, and this is where most studies will focus on, circulate materials longer, as in keep the materials in that quality or higher if possible in use as much as possible before it not ends up in a dump, but before you either downcycle it or that product that you made with that material is done being used. So as I said, what happens to it? So you have to think of your product or your materials in a way that you can use them in that quality or higher as long as possible. This is the principle that we think of the most in practical, in reality use, and in studies as well. And the third principle, and this is one that this would be the neglected principle most times, regenerate natural systems. So we have lost, I think we all know at this point, we have lost a lot of our natural systems everywhere. In Brazil, we have, most people will think of the Amazon forest, but before the Amazon forest, where the Portuguese or the French or the Dutch first landed on, we had the Atlantic forest. And from the Atlantic forest, we only have 12% of that today.
12%.
12% is left, about. In other words, 88% of it is gone.
Urbanized or what?
Mostly urbanized, but part of it also, like, just became a desert. Well, the semi-arid area. So you increase the semi-arid geographical limitation. So what this third principle aims to do is to recover these as much as possible. It includes, for example, rivers like the Seine in Paris. So recover those rivers that have been overly abused and are now totally polluted, and that water is no longer usable water, for example. So this includes whole ecosystems and, for example, like forests or water pathways, water bodies. And then we go to, so these are C1, C2, C3, the three principles from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. And then we have J1, J2, J3. These are the three elements from Schlosberg's environmental justice. And they are recognition, distribution, participation. You'll notice I have more questions on this part, because as I mentioned before, most studies will have focused on this, except maybe the regenerate natural systems part, but not entirely on the social part. So I had more questions here to find out as much as I could during the interview process. So recognition, what is recognition? In this particular situation, recognition is whether or not a certain group is recognized by a bigger group. So in my case study, whether or not waste pickers or women, usually single mothers, for example, are recognized within the whole society of the whole community of Fortaleza. So it's whether or not they feel included and whether or not that society views them as members of itself. Distribution. So similar to C2, J2 is often the part that we look at when we consider this, which is how much the materials, the benefits, the damages or the burdens of a certain system is cast upon a certain group. So what you often have is the more, let's say, the more benefited groups within a society will have more benefits and maybe less responsibilities, but the lesser groups, the lower groups, will often have to deal with the burdens, for example, the environmental burdens, which is, in the case of environmental justice, that is what we consider. They will have that burden on them cast in a much higher proportion. For example, where do they live? They tend to live in the areas that have less sanitation, that have less actions from the government, and so on. And finally, participation. Who is allowed to be part of the decision-making process? So these are 6 elements from the framework, and then we look at the case study using these 3 elements, and these questions plus the questions that were derived from these questions to interview our interviewees. Okay, so as I mentioned, the three principles, the three elements, and just so we know, the background theory, anything that these 6 points could not quite evaluate, we had sustainable development, or the 3 E's, 3 P's, however you look at it, as our background theory. So our, let's say, net theory. This is the boring part. For those of you who don't study law, I'll just make a quick run through. This is the federal legislation. So just so you know, CE, circular economy, up until this year, did not have a specific legislation in Brazil, at least not on the federal level. This year we approved two things. The federal, 10 days ago, Congress approved the circular economy national plan. And 3 months ago, the circular economy strategy. These are executive and legislative levels of the federal level. So up until then, we had the federal constitution, which guarantees the environmental rights of everybody. The Environmental Crimes Act, and this would be our main, it's a waste management act, but it would be our main circular economy legislation. So it's the National Policy of Solid Waste Management. This is where most of the federal legislation is going to fall upon, but most of our more important rules are going to come from this specific act. These are the state legislations. So they look at how, this is the one we're going to focus on most, but how to remaneuver the resources from the state, mostly to the municipalities, so that they can focus on environmental actions and including waste management purposes. These are the municipal legislations. So what we are going to look at most is Fortaleza Plus, which includes the eco-points. The eco-points and Reciclo are the two programs that most often came up during the interviews, both with the waste pickers and with the government institutions. The reason why, can anybody guess what the eco-points is going to be? Based on this name, I'm sure there are other cities that have the same program.
Yeah, the spots where you can exchange or bring your, recyclable waste and exchange it.
There you go. It's no really big puzzle, but we didn't have that up until about 8-10 years ago. So it's a relatively recent. I'd say it was around the time the World Cup came to Brazil. So a lot of improvement was made in not just the country but the city, and one of them was waste management. So the eco points started being constructed around the city. There are more than 70 at this point. So it's exactly that. You bring your recyclables to these points, and you get discounts on your electricity bill based on how much you bring. In some of them, you might get digital currency. And the Reciclo is focused on like waste pickers, but it's specific associations. It's not all of the associations. So they chose 3 and gave them motor moved, kind of like carts to help them collect more. But if we have time, I'll talk about that a bit more. So these are the main ones. So the results, looking at the case study from these 6 elements. If you look at design out, waste and pollution, only a few things came out. The public prosecutor's office is a huge player in advancing the policies and making sure that the national solid waste management plan is being implemented. So they keep pressuring the local governments, including in Fortaleza, to, for example, bring reverse logistics schemes, which is part of the national solid waste management policy.
Sorry, this is public prosecutors is a federal?
Yes. It's part, yes, but it's part of the judicial power. So executive, judicial, legislative. So it's part of that.
Is it like
So they're independent.
enforcement body, something like that? What is it? No, but why does the Hazardsunis then? How do you mean it? Like pressuring for reverse logistics? Like, what
The law
are they doing?
requires it, so it pushes companies to do it.
So remember how we said there's a difference between the legislation and the reality?
Yes.
So in order for this to become this, somebody has to push for it, right? So you have different groups like NGOs, civil societies, doing their jobs, but they're playing their roles to make this so. But the public prosecutor's office is a very important part of this. Important as in they have more power, they are able to pressure more, because they hold various functions within the Brazilian government, specifically the judicial branch.
Yeah, because our enforcement bodies are more like inspectorates. Do you have this kind of thing, or this is part of prosecutor's office?
Sorry, part
Inspectorates, for instance, are they part of?
They can have that role, but they are more in the sense of like vigilance, or it's not enforcement.
May I say something? The Brazilian system, the legal system, is basically in the judiciary part sector. You have the judge, and you have the prosecutors, and you have the defense lawyers. The prosecutors have a role of overviewing society, that guaranteeing that things are happening, and if it's not happening, they will prosecute, they will process you. So in that case, they have bodies of environmental specialized groups. This happens both in the federal and state level, okay? They have prosecutors, public prosecutors at the state level. So they will specifically sue companies or individuals, or even the government. They could do it even with the local government to enforce a law or to make it implemented. So in that case, there's actually a big discussion in Brazil. It's like the judiciary actually is playing the role of the legislative sometimes, and of the executive, because sometimes they want to enforce it, sometimes they want to change the legislation. But the fact that they are kind of have the oversight of the system, that guaranteeing that if it's not enforced, then we are going to sue you and you have to pay fines and stuff.
They are an independent institution, so they do have these functions that maybe overlap between the executive, the legislative, and the judiciary, but mainly they are part of the judiciary. So they are not enforcers in the sense of, like, for example, the police or the executive branch. But as she said, they do have the power to activate within the courts, right, some actions like to make things move on. So they are a very important player when you're in terms of environmental policies and making them become reality. So if you have the public prosecutor's office on your side, you are at least halfway through making that policy become reality in Brazil. So in terms of reverse logistics schemes, the national policy, it was the first time that this was officially established, and it made it mandatory for certain items like tires, batteries, but like I said, between legislation and reality, there's still a huge jump there. So this is why the MP, the Public Prosecutor's Office, their main role so far as I could tell was in, regarding this, like acting, like pushing for the reverse logistics schemes to become reality. This usually with the state government, Ceará in this case, but I saw some pressure for the municipalities as well. And then, in case nobody had noticed this little word before, REGE. Out of all the associations in Fortaleza, they have one huge group. So you have the individual associations, and they are all part of an alliance, and that alliance is REGE. So like I said, Brazil has a very high organization of waste pickers, and this is an example of that. Because they have bigger numbers, it means that they have more bargaining power. not every low and middle income country will have this level of regulation, for example. So they would have less bargaining power, which means less possibility of participating in decision making. So in terms of designing out waste and pollution, this is the only two things that I could detect. So it's not a lot of, let's say the results were very sparse regarding this first one. And this is very common because designing out waste and pollution is part of a design process. So it's a pre-manufacturing stage. It's not a very normal way of thinking within our linear economy. So this result was expected. And by the way, environmental education was considered part of this, as it is a way to design out reducing more waste. And only a few programs were detected here. Remember what I said before? C2, the one that we focus more for circular economy? Expectedly, the one where we had more results. So because of the EcoPoints programs and other programs that his Fortaleza Plus united or installed, the circularity of materials in Fortaleza, so in terms of the traditional circular economy, progress has been positive in this sense. So it has the percentage of materials that are recycled has increased. The percentage of materials that don't go to landfills has decreased. And this might be very simple, like a compostation pilot project. We had it before, and it was stopped. And when I conducted these interviews, the municipality was trying to restart the program. This was actually surprising for me because I expected to have compostation officially, as about 40% of our waste is organic. So you have a huge reduction there if you have a compostation facility or program. But we did not have one. So this was only a pilot when I conducted the interviews.
What is the waste fee? How much is it?
Okay. This waste services fee has been going on and off in Fortaleza. So the local assembly sometimes says, okay, we're going to have this again, and sometimes it's taken back, which means this varies based on your income level. So if you have higher incomes, you're going to pay a higher fee, and if you are part of the lower bracket, you're going to pay a lower fee or a zero, because the poorer population obviously will not be able to deal with this. So it goes.
And also, they don't generate as much waste.
True. That's true. So their impact is lower. That's true. But they do get the discounts from the EcoPoints program because they, despite everything, they still have to pay the electricity bills. They are not exempt from that. They were at some point, no longer. So it was greatly beneficial to them when the EcoPoints program was started. So it varies anything between, if memory serves me right, 10 to 75 Brazilian reais, which currently would be something like $15.
Wow. Per
So
month?
from like $3 to $15 or so.
Per month? Per person?
Per month, per household.
Per household?
Yeah,
Per month? Monthly?
per
right?
month, yes. This, if nothing has changed, it comes with the electricity bill. So as we can see, these two are tied together.
Yeah.
The fee may have been risen, so mind you, this number, this amount is from 2021. Sorry, 2022. Alright. Again, this, as you can see, not as many as C2, right? So we only had a few activities that I could classify as regenerating the natural systems. But one of them, I was surprised to find we have like afforestation programs grouped with the recyclables, the materials policies. So the one that I thought was the most interesting is they installed the PEV school, so they designated some public schools as function. For example, they receive the recyclables, they have partnerships with the local waste pickers, and you get like baby trees of local species. So you can plant these in your street, and you are officially in charge of it. So the municipality will be keeping an eye on you to make sure that you are taking care of that individual. Okay, I'm gonna speed this up a little bit. Cleaning up beaches is a regular activity that is conducted in Fortaleza, not as much as we would like it to be, but it's one. I've noticed that the municipality also started having more cleanups for different kinds of environments, especially the river bodies. Like before, it was very common to have the river filled up with waste. I noticed the last 2 times that I went there that I didn't see as much waste before because these cleaning up activities have been conducted more and more.
Is there citizen campaigns or?
No, government. Unfortunately, the citizen campaigns, as far as I can see, are only for beaches because our main industry is tourism, specifically beach. Also, it was more polluted than, debatably more polluted than the rivers. I actually disagree with that statement. All right, so from the environmental justice perspective, we're going to see different results. Specifically, this is the one that I thought was recognition, was the most important one that we should notice. This is no surprise to anybody. The waste pickers were often overlooked in all of the policies, most of the policies that I saw in Fortaleza, but here's the kicker. Even the National Waste Management Plan, the one I spoke about before, they already had included waste pickers as part of the National Solid Waste Management Plan. Again, what is supposed to be and what is reality. So the reality is waste pickers have not been included in a lot of the actual programs conducted in the municipalities, or at least in Fortaleza. And part of this I noticed during the interviews was some sort of communication problem. The waste pickers often reported that it's not that they didn't trust the government, it's that they were wary of them in most cases. Some of them were okay, some of them were a bit wary. And I noticed a couple of communication problems amongst them. The main one being the AG, the Alliance, the Waste Pickers Association Alliance, had a political change. And when this political change happened, the communication with the government also changed. So they became even less included in the policies. But what I really wanted to notice was that when I say they are overlooked, it's not just when the policies take place as they happen, but more specifically when these policies are being discussed. And about the eco points, which is the main point I want to use to elaborate this, when the government announced that the eco points were gonna become a reality as a policy, so they started discussing this as a policy, the waste pickers, and specifically the associations, had expected to be invited. As I mentioned before, waste pickers in Brazil have a huge impact on the circularity of materials, which means they're important stakeholders. If you have an important stakeholder, you expect them to be part of the decision making. They were not. Not at all. So by the time the eco points had been completely forged, had completely been planned out, thank you. All that was left was to find out what the roles of the waste pickers would be. Nothing.
This is a quick question.
Go ahead.
I assume by waste pickers we mean mainly urban picking, right? Not at the dump sites.
That is a good question. When the national policy, that law that I mentioned, was enacted, part of it was the closing of all open air dumps. And the ones that we had in Fortaleza actually has a landfill. It's not an open air dump, but you do have open air, like smaller dumps. So the city has been closing these. But at the landfill, there were waste pickers. After this policy, this National Waste Management Plan was enacted, They close it off. So there are no more waste pickers at the landfill.
Mhm.
So they are more like,
Hmm.
think like a civil society with less power and no say. Well, almost no say. It's almost like a voluntary ecological service, basically at this point.
What are the health risks to the waste picking?
The usual. So when you throw out, for example, hospital waste. So when they were at the landfills, that was a common problem because even the hospital waste went to the landfills. There was an incinerator specifically for that, but occasionally you would have, for example, syringes,
Needles.
needles, thank you, thrown there. So that is a very high risk for waste pickers. That is the most common one that I saw in studies, but you have, for example, millions of other elements, a lot of other chemicals, for example, that are there, and they often don't have appropriate footwear or gloves or any other kind of protective tools. So their skin is basically exposed.
Is it okay to ask
Go ahead.
questions? To what extent are these policies incentivizing waste management taking pressure off the production of the waste materials to change the content of the material, of the product?
That's the first thing, design out waste and pollution strategy, but the policies, yeah.
Feel free
The
to. I like
question.
debating, so just to make sure I got the question right. So how much these the legislation that I presented, specifically the National Waste Management Solid Plan, how much they influence the remaking, like the production of products
Or the
manufacturing.
continuous production, original production of what ends up as waste. That it is the
How much does it inform that
regenerative
process?
practices, is that disincentivizing the companies who originally create the materials, disincentivizing them from using different materials that would be less waste.
Okay. I unfortunately don't have numbers to give you, but it has had an impact. I have seen a couple of reports in which some companies have changed a little bit of the materials they use. They didn't change their production line, like the way things are made, but they changed the chemicals, they changed the substances to slightly safer ones. These tend to be the companies that are a little bit more environmentally conscious, like aware.
Public communication.
That true, CSR as well. So yes, but it has had an impact. That said, with the changes approved this year, I expect that number to go up within the next 25, so 15 years, because amongst those new requirements is we now have to recycle up to 70% of the recyclables by 2030, which is like 5 years away. So these changes have to happen fast.
70? You said 70%?
Yeah, they want to increase recyclables to 70%. So good luck in 5 years, but I really hope it
Can I
happens.
just interrupt? Guys, we have 4 minutes to discuss 2 more environmental justice issues, so let's continue.
Sierra state law has, the year that I was conducting this, that I was making this analysis, Sierra enacted this particular legislation. So because of the pandemic, so because the waste pickers were highly impacted, like it was not safe for them to conduct their waste picking services. So this was a way for the government to help those groups, that population. So now and it wasn't retracted once the pandemic was over. So now these are for associations though, not for individual waste pickers, keep this in mind. They have a minimum wage amount that they receive per month if they register correctly. So there's a process for this, but they now get a little bit of This is Ceará state level. It's not Fortaleza, not municipal state, or not municipal level. This is the one I said that within environmental justice is the point that we see most. So all of these were quite expected. You have the collection of recyclables. So it's mostly before it was mostly conducted by the waste pickers, but after the EcoPoints program, people voluntarily bring those, which means you have less resources, recyclables, going to the waste pickers. So this was a social impact that the EcoPoints brought. This already like very poor community is getting had their means of life, like their economy, their funding reduced, affected, because they have where some people before would voluntarily donate their recyclables to them, they are not doing so anymore because it's more beneficial to go to the EcoPoint. So this was a huge impact for them, socially speaking, and partly this is because they were not invited to the decision-making process. And one more I want to focus on. Ecofar is the company that is in charge of the waste collection, which means they were part of the decision-making process. When they manage the EcoPoints, and they get paid for the waste collection, so they have a triple gain here, which means the waste pickers have had their share reduced, and EcoPoints had theirs. Ecofar, the company, the business, had their share increased. So it's a huge gap in the distribution.
And no programs to transition people from waste picking into more formal.
There are very few of those. Mostly because in this particular aspect, a lot of the waste pickers do not want to change. Why? Because as waste pickers, they are not required to work, for example, 8 hours a day. They can make their own schedule. They can go whenever they want. Depends on the association, though. Some of them have a few more years. So while they get less income, they also have more freedom. So a lot of them actually don't want formal jobs or maybe even better jobs. This is partly because they also have a very low education.
Also family obligations.
Also true. That said, a lot of them will encourage their kids to go to school. It's a very fascinating thing I noticed during these interviews. A lot of these single mothers say that they worked hard to get their kids to school, and some of them even told me very successful stories in this sense. But they themselves don't see themselves in a higher position or a better job or anything. I think this might be a generational gap thing. Oh, just so you know, that's the map of Fortaleza. These are the human index. Human Development Index. So these are the different parts, like the blocks, for example, the regions in which it's divided, and you can see the higher index is mostly here. And by the way, this is where the beach, the touristic spots are. So there you can see the association there. Most of them are located in places where the Human Development Index is lower. Those are the colorful ones are the associations I was talking about. So these are the ones that I interviewed from 1 to 9. These 2 were also officially registered. The others were not officially registered but were on their way there. That's why they are included. Okay, and in terms of participation, there was not much to there weren't many results here. We had public hearings in some of these policies. How much the public participated or not is subject to discussion. You had very few parts of the community participating. And most definitely the waste pickers did not participate as much as they should have been able to in the decision-making process of a lot of these policies and programs. The sequel is the one exception that I found, the one that I mentioned that they get these motorized carts. Okay, so that's a summary of everything we saw before. And just to wrap things up, so as we had, as I mentioned at the beginning, when you look at this from a circular economy perspective, so basically in this case C1, C2, C3, the transition in Fortaleza is going somewhat well in terms of circularity, but the other two principles, so designing out waste, your question in this case, and the regenerating natural systems is really far behind. These two aspects need to be brought up to the same level as C2. That was not entirely unexpected. But in terms of environmental justice, as we saw, the policies that made it possible for circular economy to be progressing positively have also had a huge impact on some of parts of the population, specifically the waste pickers. So whenever, the conclusion is, if you look, if you use this framework specifically, if you look at circular economy policies when you're elaborating them, and you're thinking about the social impacts that they might have, you need to include this even in the planning stages. When you're designing policies, you have to consider the social impacts that they might have. And I designed this framework so that you can have that possibility. You can design out your circular economy policies whilst thinking of the possible social impacts that it might have. So you can avoid them preferably. Okay, just mentioned that. All right. So basically, how can environmental justice help for a better transition to circular economy? I just mentioned it by making, helping the policy making and also the way you implement the policies in a way that is more fairly balanced. That the distribution, the participation, and the inclusion of different parts of the community, or specifically the stakeholders, are considered in these policies. So you have as minimum impacts, social impacts in this case, or environmental impacts as possible. And one of the things that this does is, and that's one of the significance part, is it helps with the SDGs. Like how many SDGs can CE usually tackle? It's usually limited to the
SDG 12.
sustainable cities, right? Like some of, and sustainable production. So SDGs 8 and 12, if memory doesn't fail me. With this, it can help with, for example, gender disparity, depending how you tackle it. If you look at the regenerative natural systems, you can also take a look at the environmental SDGs as well, and education, for example. So it has a broader range of SDGs that it can tackle. Yeah. Obviously, the empirical studies and significance as well. And after this, we basically have the limitations of, these are the 3 publications that I made. One is my thesis, the other one is an article in English, and the other one is an article in Japanese, which was very hard. Disregard that. Okay. So limitations for this research, the interdisciplinary aspect of it was a bit complicated for me, as I'm basically from a law background. The time constraints and obviously the economic constraints were also possible restriction. Geographical limits, like how many of these results were actually confined to Fortaleza and how many were a bit broader, were sometimes a bit difficult to detect. So if you conduct this kind of research using this framework in a bigger scale, so a state or possibly a country, it would have less limitations, but it would also require more time and funding. Which is why future research, that is what I recommended. So bigger scale and looking at more stakeholders. I did not interview as many business stakeholders as I would like to have. Okay, that's it. Thank you very much. Time management was awful. I apologize for that.
Thank you. No, it was great. So Alan delegated me to thank you for this. And yeah, are there any questions? More questions? Because I have a few.
Go ahead.
No?
Let's see. Does anybody else?
I
Yes.
just want to comment that there's some irony here, that Paulo Freire did his original work in Brazil, teaching peasants how to name their environment, and that's how they became literate and demonstrated change their working environment. So your work has a legacy. Thank you.
Thank you for that.
Are you familiar with his work, Pedagogy of the Oppressed?
Paulo Freire.
Only by title. I
Okay.
unfortunately have not read it.
I think you might enjoy it.
One more time. Pedagogy by.
Of the Oppressed by Paulo Freire.
Oh, hold on. Is that like when he was conducting his research? He often had to use like the same kind of wording that the local populations would use instead of the ones that you use when you're normally teaching. Is that the research? Okay, I'm somewhat familiar with it, but I have yet to read it in its entirety. So it's actually on my to-read list / to-do list. So thank you for that.
Any questions?
Just from the standpoint of human rights and social justice, I was just wondering, is waste speakers, are they considered, as you said, they're part of civil society? But for example, would they be, for example, if they are affiliated with any organization, as we also spoke about it, wouldn't be, where do they, like, in the system of checks and balances, which branch do they fall into? Is it more like activism, or like, with which branch, judicial, executive, or
None.
no? There's no like ministry or anything that bears the duties.
Oh, okay. Not like who would protect their rights? Is that it?
Mm-hmm.
Should be all three.
Since they're part of civil society.
That is actually questionable as well.
Oh.
Remember the recognition element?
Mhm.
So that's where that plays in. They often in these kind of communities, they are often looked at as external to the community. So like a part of the community that, of the society that the people in that society want out of it. Basically because there is a certain stigma that comes with it, which is the smell, as they deal with waste, right? So there's a stigma of smelling really bad, and the whole image. So as they tend to be poor, generally speaking, there's a stigma of it's not something pleasant to look at or to smell. So that's a part of society that is either ignored or like they want out of. So technically, legally speaking, yes, they are part of civil society, but I don't know how I'm going to put this. Like socially speaking, they are often considered outside of it. So in order to protect their rights, that would be all three branches, starting with the legislation. Does that
Yeah,
answer your
I
question?
had this comment on the statistical committee. It doesn't. You don't need to go there. It's interesting that we have an opposite situation with the statistics.
How so?
So your statistics lies in terms of like there is more than more recycling happening than it is.
What do you mean?
Well, like the statistical committee, the reports, public reports on recycling, etc. Did I understand it correctly that you as a country you report more than is happening?
No, that is not
Somehow.
quite what I meant.
No?
You meant about the waste pickers or the official recycling?
Official recycling. So you said it's not happening as much as it is reported, right?
I have
No?
no way of confirming that. That said, the official numbers I think were, it kind of depends on the materials though. Like for example, cardboard and aluminum is almost 100%. Plastics on the other hand is, if memory serves me right, back then was about 20-something%, maximum 30%. I think less than 20 actually. So they were aiming for, last time I checked, not the policies approved this year. Before they were aiming to increase the recycling of plastics to 30-something%. Well, aiming for 50%, but the nearest was 35%, I think, which means we were recycling less than that in terms of plastic. But as for the comparison between the actual numbers and the official numbers, it varies greatly by municipality, for example. So there are a lot of municipalities that still only have open air dumps. They don't have like sanitary landfills, for example, which is something that the national policy had aimed to completely like close down all of them, right? So that's a change that has unfortunately not yet happened 100%, but a lot of them have closed. So it kind of depends. I've seen a couple of reports in which they mentioned this, that the numbers were higher than actual. But it's not, I don't think you can say it's a general trend.
Because we have our statistical committee reports 0 recycling. Yeah, this is what I'm saying. Yeah.
Yeah, no, we don't.
But we have some public recycling, public sorting programs, very minor, but we still have, and we have a lot of informal sorting going on. But we report 0.
Where does this report come from? Is it the companies? Is it like?
Oh, like state statistical committee.
Yes, and like what do they investigate? Like do
Yeah,
they go
that's the
directly to
question.
recycling
That's the
companies
question.
or?
Send questions to these institutions?
No, they only receive figures from municipalities. Anyway,
That
which is a shame. I mean, because we have something to report and we don't report. So if you look to Armenia in, like, I don't know, World Bank, I don't know, statistics, etc., we're like down in whatever 100 and something. But if we count, it may turn out we recycle, I don't know, 90% of glass waste, something like 60% of paper waste, this and that. But we report 0. That's no recycling in Armenia.
Glass is an interesting material, but in the case of Brazil, as it's a huge country, it's very difficult to get it recycled because most of the companies are in the south.
Yeah.
And transportation within that country, as it is a wide country, is very tricky because it's mostly done by trucks. So you have to get a large number of like broken glass or glass that is meant to go to recycling all the way down back there, and you don't have a lot of transportation for that. So in the end,
Costs.
sadly, yeah, the costs do not compensate most of the time. So unfortunately, we don't recycle glass as much as we should because it is basically 100% recyclable.
Is this do I understand correctly, you don't have extended producer responsibility legislation in the country?
That is one of the principles that the national policy brought. So we did not until then, 2010, okay? So we do have it now, but the execution of this is still a bit tricky. Again, this is the MP, part of the MP's role to enforce this, to make it a reality and so on. So we have it, but it's not very active.
But producers and importers of goods, so certain goods, they do pay or they don't pay fees?
To recycle this, to get it back.
Yeah.
So that is part of the reverse logistics scheme, and glass is not one of the
Glass is no.
materials that is mandatory for reverse
Okay,
logistics.
what is mandatory? Plastic?
No.
No?
Some plastic bottles, usually the containers for oils or chemicals. Plastics is technically in that category, but it's the one that is least looked at because it's of its variability. When you say plastic, you have 1,000 types of plastic, so it becomes more complicated to have the reverse logistics for this. So unfortunately, that is the one material in the list that is not progressing very well. But the others, so tires, batteries, certain types of lamps, lights,
Bulbs.
Bulbs, thank you, light bulbs. Like I mentioned, the containers for chemicals and so on, those are mandatory and they have, a lot of these programs are in place
So
already.
you pick like hazardous problematic waste.
Basically, yes.
Interesting.
To be fair, tires had already, were already not a problem. I think they just put it in there just to have a legislation background, like just to make sure that it's already part of the regulations, but it was basically already taken care of.
Interesting.
Do you have permitted hazardous waste landfills?
Yes. In Fortaleza or in
Just in
general?
Brazil in general.
Yes, we do. Maybe not as many as we should,
Mm.
but there is. There are.
Are there statistics kept on the amount of energy required to recycle?
In general, so we have NGOs that, or more specifically, like business associations that often take care of this of these statistics. So it goes back to what he pointed out. I don't know how reliable this information is, because again, self-induced private agenda. But you can look up this information on these business associations websites. So yes, I have seen some reports of, for example, how much energy it takes to recycle glass, for example, or to recycle this material or that. So you can find that information if you dig for it.
Well, it shouldn't be different from other countries. I mean, it's industrial kind of energy footprint is almost like. I was interested in gate fees at the landfills.
Which one?
Landfill gate fees, landfill taxes.
Ah.
What was the story with that? Interesting. Did you?
So I told you it's on and off, right? So this started even before I was born, actually. So it has, like the recent development was because there has been an onslaught of environmental policies and like more and more promotion for these. So it has come back into the debate. So do we charge this? Do we not charge this? What is the main issue of why we shouldn't, why we should, and why we shouldn't? Why we should is the same as high income countries. So if you, theoretically, if you're charged, you will emit less. That is the basic idea of a waste tax. It's not a landfill tax.
And you will promote better solutions.
Theoretically.
Well,
What did I find here? Because this is a population that, for the most part, has lower income, so the impact is not quite like that. For example, they are not required to pay this fee, so it doesn't, well, depending on the income, like I said, so it doesn't affect them, so to say. And for the people who it does affect, the problem is it's based on your income, not on how much you emit. So how much you emit doesn't really factor into the way they're going to start thinking. It doesn't change their emission levels.
but the sanitary but the sanitary landfills that you have now, you build now, they have gate fees and they pay landfill taxes, right? They should.
What?
If not, how do they pay back? Who's paying for it? Because sanitary landfill is expensive. It's like, it's not less than, let's say, 30, 40 euros per ton as a tipping fee. And if there is a landfill tax, it adds. So who finances sanitary landfill?
So what usually happens is
Landfill.
these are PPPs, right? So it's a partnership between a
Yeah.
waste management company and
Okay.
the local government or the state government, depending. So the government will give them a certain amount,
So it's subsidized.
subsidized.
But
And the company itself will also invest in it. So I don't know the proportions, I think this also varies. But basically to construct these landfill, also there, because of the national policy, there have been a lot of funding. Like the federal government made a lot of, had presented, prepared a lot of funding for this kind of project. So after 2010, if you presented a technical project, then you could most likely get the funding to construct the landfill. But the management and even the construction is usually a PPP, so it's usually both the government and the business company.
yeah, that's the capital cost. That's clear. Then you need operational costs to be covered. This was my question, because it costs
like
to
how
operate
do-
the landfill. So you put the waste and you should pay pretty high fees for that.
Do you know there's a World Bank study that says that sometimes up to 50% of actually higher than that, but like around 50% of a low/middle income municipalities' finance is usually occupied just by that. So about 50% of whatever, how much that municipality gathers in terms of tax or whatever, goes to waste management, whatever the program or is in place.
So it's still subsidized.
It's subsidized.
Yeah, okay.
There's not
But-
much.
Okay.
That was to my question, I was wondering who
Yeah.
owns the landfills, is it,
Mm.
are they owned by the government or are they privately owned?
Some are privately owned.
Mhm.
Actually, I think most of them are. Hold on. So there's an agreement. I don't know what's it called in English, but basically the land itself is usually owned by
Public?
the government.
Yeah.
It's public.
Mhm.
Yeah. So as far as I know, what normally happens is you have the company come in, build that the landfill, manage it for a certain
For 30
time.
years or something, and then ownership goes to the municipality.
But what usually happens is it just gets extended.
Ah, okay.
Right, so unless there is another company that comes in and has like a better project for it, so they switch who is managing it. But what usually happens is it just that contract gets extended and extended again and again until the landfill is completely filled. Which again is part of the whole design not waste concept. Like, what do you do when the landfill is filled, right? So what happens to all of that is buried in there, and where do you put the waste that comes there and after?
So in Brazil, closed landfills, that land is not reused, like in the US, at least in New Jersey, you know, there's golf courses on landfills, we have parks on landfills.
Sport yards.
Exactly.
It was a very interesting project I believe it was in Teresina, which is very close to somewhat close to where the COP is being held, COP 30. And the project was exactly that. They filled up a landfill, and what usually happens is nothing happens to that area. So it's just,
Right.
it just stays there. So in this case, they did exactly what you mentioned. So they constructed a whole park, a whole entertainment
Right.
area. So it has parks, it has playgrounds, and it had, if I'm not mistaken, it also had some sort of environmental station for environmental education. So it was a very interesting project, but as far as I know, it's not the common
Okay.
outcome. So it would be lovely if we had more of that.
Because it's still expensive, you know. We can pay back somehow, but
For sure.
yeah.
True, but then you end up with that big area just doing nothing over there.
Right,
And
right.
I don't know about Armenia, but in Brazil, land should have a social purpose. So if its social purpose is just to house old
Old
waste, I don't know if that is considered a social purpose. At least it's
Right.
not a very good one. But it's better than having it outside, so. If it's a sanitary landfill. The problem is if it's not, so it will have no, blocking,
Liner,
right? So
right.
chemicals will infiltrate and so on, so. That might
Thank
not be
you.
so fun.
Yeah,
Yeah,
can I
yeah.
ask something about
Please do.
one of the components of this environmental justice, the public participation? I was wondering if it is somehow regulated by primary or secondary laws in Brazil and how it is in practice and in theory.
That is a great question. Thank you. So I can't give you a date specifically, but more and more public hearings have become mandatory for certain kinds of legislations. And if I'm not mistaken, environmental legislation is part of that. The problem is the level of participation is not as high as you would like, right? But for example, they have, like if you have a bill, right? So for a certain time, online, members from society can comment on the proposed bill, right? So that's a kind of public participation.
Like e-draft.
Yes, so for legislation in general, it doesn't matter what the topic is, that happens. But in terms of public hearing, like to actually have the physical space for people to literally go and participate, obviously that demands your time, your awareness of that happening. I think the main problem might be like where you get this information, right? So it's not very normal for us to check, please correct me if I'm wrong.
So, go
For,
ahead.
how common do you think it is for Brazilians to check, like whether there will be a public hearing on a topic that they are interested in, and then they actually go?
Well, actually, there's a lot of participation in Brazil, and there are a lot of forums, right? It depends on the city, and it also depends on the political environment of each state and of each locality. But for example, in São Paulo, you have many councils. São Paulo city is the largest city in Brazil in terms of population and economy. And it's-
Latin America in general, I think.
Yes, I'm not sure because it competes with Mexico
Mexico
City.
City.
So anyway, it's going up and down, and but anyway, it has a lot of participation that also goes ups and down, and it's very interesting because something that I've been very interested on and working a lot with is that and like you see that sometimes I think when they reach a peak and then they go down.
Oh, yes.
They have cycles of participation, you know. Like,
Yes.
and sometimes you say, well, why do you not participation? Or maybe there is no need to participation. But there are several forms. For example, on Monday, not Monday, on Wednesday, I will talk about the participatory budgeting. And it's something that incentivizes a lot of participation. But it also has had ups and downs. It was created, not I would say like formalized in Brazil in the 80s, and even the places where it has been implemented up front, it has gone down. So I think it depends on politics and other things. But for waste pickers, I think it's a fascinating matter because they are very strong in terms of participation. In São Paulo City, the organizations are super strong. In the states that she mentioned later, Teresina is the capital, they have a really strong organization, and they have done a really interesting work there. I don't know if you know the waste speakers there.
Teresina, I've read only one article about it.
Yeah, but they are very strong. They are very mobilized. They participate in not just local forums, the national forums, international forums, and so it's very interesting how, and it depends on the issue too, right? The topic. So.
This is a good point that you brought up. So for example, I'm part of a circular economy group in Brazil, and one of our members is a waste picker. And it's interesting because almost every other week, he is traveling somewhere to give a talk on, his activities. And it's not just the waste picking activity per se, but also he promotes all sorts of forums and workshops and so on regarding this, right? So recyclability, material sorting, and so on. So every other week he updates us on where he's going, and he is actually going to be an official participant at COP30. So that's the level of organization. And I've heard this from my interviewees as well.
But mind that São Paulo, Brazil has 5,500 municipalities and only 5,000 landfills, of which 3,700 are sanitary, and the 1,000 something are non-sanitary. They are dumps, and this actually shows it's still there a long way to go. And most of these more like let's say organized and regularized, legalized sanitary waste landfills. They are in the southern part of Brazil. It goes with the poverty risk, highly correlated with poverty, with development of the state and age, the human index. Yes, HDI. So and it's actually for me. I have friends also in the waste pickers movements, both in Piauí, in the Teresina, but also in São Paulo. I had students. I had a PhD student who was a waste picker. So it's wonderful, right? To have he initially was my student as a master's student and then a PhD student, and he wants to be a waste picker. He wants to work there despite having a PhD, and so they are very organized and very mobilized, but I still see a lot of disparity among the states.
Yeah, so when they are part of an association, which mind you is less than, if memory doesn't fail, less than 10%. So somewhere in between 6 to 12% maximum is the percentage of waste pickers that are part of an association, right? So if you're part of an association, obviously that's going to give you more bargaining power. But most of them are still individual waste pickers. And then you have all of the other social problems that come with it. For example, drugs is a common problem in that situation. For both the associated ones as well as the individual ones. So you have people with different histories, different backgrounds there. So when they are part of an association, it's more likely that this kind of outcome may happen. And like she said, and I just mentioned, quite a few of the interviews that I had mentioned traveling, for example, to Brasilia for some sort of forum regarding not just waste picking, but like waste management in general. So you do have the ones that have a higher level of participation, but most of them are content, I mean, as far as I could tell from my interviews, most of them are content to just stay there, do their work when they want to, like the days that they want to go or the days that they are required to go, depending on the association rules, and gather and get that little money, and that's enough for their survival. So it's interesting to see like how people from technically the same, let's say, profession, actually in Brazil it is qualified as a profession, how they have like, you have people with these different thought processes.
May I say something that might be curious? As I was growing up, we used to work in community areas, like as a young teenager, 13, 14. And I remember that it was like more than 40 years ago. And I remember there was we visited a landfill, and people were, 40 years ago, they were collecting, I think, picking from garbage is not a novelty, but I mean, they were recycling at that time. And they were recycling particularly plastic bags. So it was an image that stayed in my mind because it was awful, right, for a 13-year-old, like how you eat from the garbage and you collect.
But plastic bags like the supermarket
Yes,
ones?
yes,
That's
they
one of
were-
the plastic that is least recycled. That's very
Yes,
interesting.
and it was like 45 years ago, at least. I'm telling my age, right? But anyway, so it was very interesting because I think there was and sometimes it was for their survival, you know, they had to do it. But it's not something that has been recently, more recent as the waste pickers movement, because the waste picker movement maybe 20, 30 years at most, but it has been happening before that. And they've been surviving of that and doing construction and selling it, but and then most recently they have the legislation, the everything. But it has been, I have seen it like 45 years ago.
Yeah, regulation-wise, they are covered. There are a lot of like laws and acts and regulations that do protect the waste pickers. The difference is how well is it enforced? Like how does reality translate these regulations? Often, you still need to do a much better job.
Thank you so much.
You are so welcome.
Tremendous.
I am very sorry for the really bad time management, but I'm very happy that you were able to come.
Just a lot of questions, not your fault.
Very good, thank you.
Well, if you want to
Thank
go to karaoke night, we can talk more.
I'll go. I have never been in a karaoke bar.
Are you kidding me?
We need, and I sing really badly. I